The night of the charity gala was painted in gold and silver. Chandeliers dripped with light, gowns shimmered like flowing water, and the air buzzed with polite laughter. Waiters carried trays of champagne, weaving around men in tuxedos and women draped in jewels. For most, it was a night of celebration, business deals disguised as toasts, secrets exchanged in whispers between clinking glasses. For Alexander Reed, it was another obligation. Another night where he wore the mask of perfection, the ruthless CEO, the untouchable king of glass towers and million-dollar contracts. He stood near the center of the hall, tailored black suit sculpted to his frame, a glass of scotch in hand. People orbited him, cautious yet eager for his attention. He barely listened, nodding now and then, his mind elsewhere. 6 months. It had been 6 months since Olivia walked out of his life, leaving behind silence where her laughter once lingered. 6 months since the divorce papers were signed in a sterile office, her hand steady while his pen felt like lead. He had buried himself in work, telling himself it didn't matter. He had built an empire with no room for love, so why did its absence suddenly feel like a gaping wound? He raised the glass to his lips when the ballroom doors opened. And the world stopped. Olivia entered with a grace that silenced his breath. She wore a simple midnight blue gown, not the elaborate designer pieces of their married life, yet she looked more radiant than he had ever seen her. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes, God, those eyes, carried a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. The crowd seemed to part for her unconsciously, as though her presence commanded space without effort. But it wasn't just her. In her arms, she carried something, someone. A baby, swaddled in pale cream fabric, its tiny head resting against her chest. The sight hit Alexander like a physical blow. His fingers went numb, and the glass slipped from his hand. It shattered against the marble floor, the sharp sound cutting through the hum of music and chatter. Conversations paused, heads turned. The unshakable CEO, the man known for his composure in the face of crises worth billions, had dropped a glass like a rookie at his first gala. But Alexander didn't notice the stares. His world had shrunk into a single point of focus, her, and the child in her arms. His chest tightened, a storm of questions surging all at once. A baby, her baby, 6 months, 6 months since the divorce. His mind raced, doing the math against his will, against the pounding of his heart. Was it possible? Could it be? He couldn't move. His legs felt locked, rooted in place. For a man who had commanded entire boardrooms with a glance, Alexander now felt utterly powerless. His throat worked, but his voice barely escaped. That can't be. The words slipped out, fragile and broken, audible only to himself, yet they tasted of fear. Olivia's eyes found his across the room. The moment their gazes met, time thickened. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She held his stare with a quiet defiance, a strength he remembered from nights long past, back when she used to argue with him over late dinners, reminding him that love could not be scheduled between meetings. Back then, he had brushed it aside, certain she would always wait for him, certain she would always be there. Now, she wasn't his. And in her arms, nestled close to her heart, was a mystery that tore him apart. He tried to take a step forward, but his body betrayed him. Fear froze his muscles, not the fear of the truth but of the possibility that the truth would shatter him entirely. What if the child was his? What if it wasn't? Both possibilities felt like knives. He could feel the weight of the room pressing against him. Whispers began to ripple around the hall, subtle yet sharp. People noticed the way his eyes refused to leave Olivia. They noticed the baby. In a world of power and gossip, nothing went unnoticed. He knew by tomorrow the city would be buzzing with speculation. But none of it mattered. None of it ever would. The only thing that mattered was the woman he had lost and the child in her arms. His hands clenched at his sides. The ruthless CEO who could sign deals worth millions without blinking suddenly couldn't summon the courage to walk across a ballroom. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might betray him in front of everyone. Olivia's lips curved into the faintest smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She adjusted the baby's blanket, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead, then shifted her attention away from him as though he were no one special. As though he were just another stranger in the room. That look, that dismissal, cut deeper than any courtroom, deeper than any loss of business he had ever faced. It was the look of a woman who had moved on, who had built a life without him. He realized in that moment that the empire he had spent his life building meant nothing. Not against the sight of Olivia holding what could be his greatest creation, his greatest legacy, not a hotel, not a skyscraper, but a child. Alexander's breath shook as he finally forced himself to move. Each step felt heavier than the last. The crowd melted away into shadows and murmurs. His entire world had narrowed to the few feet separating him from her. His chest rose and fell with a desperation he couldn't hide. And yet, when he reached the edge of the crowd where she stood, he stopped. His hand lifted slightly, trembling, before falling uselessly to his side. He couldn't bring himself to speak. He couldn't ask the question burning inside him, the question that would either save him or destroy him. Instead, he just stared, frozen in place, his mask shattered. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, the CEO who had never lost, stood before his ex-wife and a child, utterly powerless, drowning in a silence heavier than any words. And Olivia, cradling the baby, looked right through him as though she had already made peace with a life that no longer included him. The ballroom's hum returned gradually, but Alexander didn't hear it. The laughter, the music, the footsteps across polished marble, all of it blurred into meaningless noise. His heartbeat drowned out everything, loud and uneven in his ears. He had faced hostile takeovers, bankrupting rivals with a single signature, but nothing prepared him for the sight before him, Olivia, his ex-wife, carrying a baby that could very well be his own flesh and blood. His body moved before his mind did. He pushed through clusters of curious guests, brushing past their whispers, ignoring the polite greetings and startled glances. His pace was too fast for composure, too uneven for the man they were used to seeing, a man who walked with the calmness of someone who owned every room he entered. Tonight, he didn't own a thing. Tonight, he was just a man stripped bare, desperate for answers. When he stopped in front of her, the world shrank to silence again. He could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume, the same one she used to wear on late evenings when she waited for him to come home from work. But her scent was no longer tied to warmth. It was tied to distance, to everything he had lost. Olivia looked up at him, calm and steady. Her eyes, those same brown eyes that once softened whenever he touched her, were unreadable now, guarded, almost indifferent. She adjusted the baby in her arms, rocking gently, as if Alexander's presence meant little compared to the life she cradled. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. His throat burned. He wanted to reach out, to touch the child, to prove to himself this wasn't some fevered illusion. His hand lifted, trembling, then stopped midair. He couldn't bring himself to complete the motion. He was terrified of rejection, of the truth, of everything this moment represented. Olivia, his voice cracked, rough and low, carrying a vulnerability he hadn't shown in years. Is the baby mine? The question sliced the silence. Guests nearby froze, pretending not to listen, though their ears strained for every word. To them, this was gossip waiting to explode, but for Alexander, it was life or death. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. She looked at him steadily, almost coldly, though her arms held the baby with a tenderness that made his chest ache. She didn't answer immediately. She let the weight of his question hang between them like a blade suspended by a thread. At last, she spoke, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "Does it matter, Alexander?" The words hit harder than any boardroom defeat. He staggered back slightly, as though struck. His lips parted in disbelief, but she continued before he could gather himself. "When I was with you," she said, her tone calm, almost gentle, but laced with pain, "I was invisible. I lived in your shadow, waiting for scraps of attention between your meetings and calls. I thought if I loved you enough, if I waited long enough, you would notice me. You never did. All I had was loneliness, even while I was married to you." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She had shed them long ago, long before tonight. "Now," she whispered, looking down at the baby whose tiny fist clutched her dress, "I have everything." The child stirred slightly, and she rocked it with a smile so soft, so genuine, that Alexander's heart twisted in agony. She wasn't the broken woman who left him. She was stronger now, rebuilt, carrying her own light. And he wasn't part of it. Alexander's hand fell to his side, limp and useless. He couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think. He had spent years mastering control, yet in front of her, in front of that child, he was undone. His empire, his power, his wealth, they meant nothing here. None of it could answer the only question that mattered. "Olivia, please," he said, his voice desperate now, no longer the polished tone of a CEO but the raw sound of a man stripped bare. "If the baby is mine, I deserve to know." She tilted her head slightly, studying him as though seeing him for the first time. Deserve, she repeated softly, with a bitter trace of amusement. What exactly do you think you deserve, Alexander? You gave me walls of glass and marble but never a home. You gave me your name but never your heart. And now you think you deserve this? Her words sliced through him like glass shards. He had always thought himself a provider, a man who gave everything. But she was right, he had given her wealth, status, and luxury, but never himself. Not truly. The baby let out a small cry, breaking the heavy silence. Olivia swayed gently, whispering soft words that soothed the child instantly. Watching her, Alexander felt something break inside him. Regret, sharp and merciless, tore through his chest. This was what he had missed. This was what he had thrown away, not just her love, but the chance at a family, at a life beyond business. He reached for her again, his voice raw. Tell me what I can do. Tell me how to fix this. For the first time, her expression softened, but it wasn't forgiveness. It was pity. You can't fix it, she said quietly. Some things can't be bought, negotiated, or rebuilt. You had your chance, Alexander. I begged you to see me. You didn't. And now, it's too late. Her words landed with the finality of a slammed door. He felt it in his bones, that this wasn't a negotiation he could win, not with money, not with power, not with charm. The baby nestled closer against her chest, its tiny hand brushing her collarbone. She smiled down at it, a smile that carried everything she had ever wanted, everything he had failed to give. And Alexander, the man who once believed himself invincible, stood there with nothing. He had frozen when he first saw her, but now he understood, it wasn't just shock that held him still. It was the realization that the life he had always dismissed, the life he had taken for granted, had slipped away forever. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reed, the CEO who could command the world, was utterly defeated. Not in business, but in love. Not in the markets, but in her heart. And as Olivia turned away, carrying the baby into the golden light of the ballroom, he felt the hollow truth echo through him. The empire he had built was vast, but it was empty.